Hey everybody, so I wanted to do a video on the minimum wage, and no one was really talking about it recently. So I went back and I found when Peter Schiff went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and Peter Schiff is a prominent libertarian economist, and he basically gives out some of the most common arguments against the minimum wage. So what I wanted to do is kind of play this video and then stop it along the way with kind of my rebuttals to the arguments that he puts forward. And then I have it going at 1.5 speed. I really hope that's not too fast. If it is too fast, please comment down below if you think so.
No, none. So someone working for $1 an hour doesn't bother you?
Well, I mean, it's better than working for zero. I mean, people think that, they want to impose their morals and say, well, it's not right for somebody to work for $1 an hour. Well, people make rational decisions, right? And so if somebody is accepting $1 an hour, and that must mean that nobody offered them $1.50, nobody offered them $2. I mean, this is a competitive market. I mean, I know you have an employee over here. I mean, could you pay?
So, I mean, just right there, I mean, the idea that just because somebody accepts a wage, that means that was like the rational decision, and that because people, the whole basis of libertarianism is on voluntarism, where people voluntarily accept different positions and whatnot. But that doesn't take into account the idea of economic coercion, because as people, all of us have basic needs. We need to eat. We need a place to sleep. We need, we have certain bare necessities. We need healthcare. And we can't survive without these things. And so somebody could not live off $1 a day. They just couldn't. Unless they had some sort of help on the outside. So this idea that just because you accept a job, you must have by definition wanted it is just ridiculous. Because I mean, you can think of some pretty clear, like a very extreme example would be, say there's someone who they literally need their insulin or they are going to die, like right there, they need it, and then someone has a bottle of insulin and they say, well, if you sign this contract and agree to work with me for the next week, where I won't pay you but I'll give you this bottle of insulin, and then this person who's like on the verge of death, if they're like, okay, yeah, I'll accept, and they sign the contract, and then they have to work for a week and they get the bottle of insulin and they voluntarily did it because it was between getting their insulin or dying, that would technically be voluntary, and that is obviously a super extreme example. I'm not saying that things are happening to that extent, but I do think that it highlights the fact that, like, just because someone voluntarily accepts a job does not mean that there is not some economic coercion taking place.
$1 an hour? Will he work for you?
I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I guess no, because he could get more.
Right, but he's educated and skilled, and he's an actual audio engineer. And
of course.
Right, but it's very difficult for people to get that sort of an education, particularly in Puerto Rico thought of as a third world environment.
No,
it's not a country.
It's not third world, but let's say some kid came in here that had no experience whatsoever, but he wanted to learn. He wanted to just get you coffee and just sit around and be around you. He's not that productive.
Yeah, they use interns, right? A lot of radio stations do that, and they don't pay them anything.
I know, that's $0 an hour.
I can't do that.
Well, then, but maybe you pay him $5 now, whatever it is. But people are going to accept a job.
Ooh, just a little footnote there. Unpaid internships should 100% be illegal. I mean, they're 100% exploitative. I understand that you could be getting experience, but that's just, and unless there's some sort of like college credit involved or something, that you shouldn't be able to get labor from people for free. That should not be legal. I understand that you can like get experience and everything, but I just don't think that that's, I think that there's so many opportunities where that is taken advantage of, and I think that there are places that take advantage of young college kids, and they come hoping to get experience, and sometimes maybe they do get experience, but like, you can pay them along the way. If they're doing work for you, then you can pay them. If they're providing value, then you can pay them.
That's the best one they can get. And so if somebody is working for $1 an hour or $2 an hour, by default, I know that they couldn't find a higher job than that. And the reason is because they don't have a lot of skills. But if you don't have a lot of skills, the best thing you can do is get a job so you can get some skills. That's where you learn skills. You get more skills. There are people that pay to get skills, right? If you go to school, you actually have to pay tuition. If I'm getting paid $1 an hour while I learn something that has value, that's better. You have people now borrowing money to learn a skill. People graduate college and they're in debt.
Right, but that's a weird argument, right? Because you're assuming that they're going to get a skill. I mean, they might just be handling packages and picking them up and moving to another location, or digging a hole, or
even that's like show up on time, be responsible.
So discipline.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you learn when you have a job. But the problem with the minimum wage.
Now, okay, I mean, Joe Rogan kind of points it out right there. Just this idea that you aren't necessarily gaining skills if you're working, especially these low-wage jobs. And if you're working for, let's say, $5 an hour, we won't go with like the $1 a day because that's just so extreme. $5 an hour. That would be very, very difficult to live off of. And maybe in some areas, if you were skimping by, you could do that for a short period of time. Not for very long. I use $5 an hour because that is probably a realistic wage that somebody might get if there was no minimum wage. Right now, it's like, what is it, $7.25 federally. And so this idea that if you are, like Joe Rogan says, stacking boxes or whatever, we know that these jobs exist. Stacking boxes, you're working for $5 a day. If you quit your job, you will not be able to feed yourself anymore because you don't have very much savings because you've been working this low-paying job. You have to work a lot of hours because if you're not working a lot of hours, you can't support yourself. And so you have people that literally just get stuck in this minimum wage job where they can't go find another job because they work a ton of hours because they're not getting paid very much and they need to work a bunch of hours if they want to eat. And then it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And these people aren't like gaining these quote unquote skills. Yeah, there are jobs where people gain skills. And people do get experience and do having just some sort of work experience that does help you. But there's no reason why people shouldn't be getting paid a minimum wage along the way. I mean, this isn't even an argument against $15 an hour, which is what I think it should be, a living wage. This is just an argument against a minimum wage.
Is that the minimum wage basically hurts the very people that it's intended to help, because the minimum wage basically says if you are a worker, if you cannot convince an employer to pay you $7.25 or $10 an hour, whatever the minimum wage is, then you cannot accept that job. See, it doesn't hurt the employer. It hurts the employee because it limits his options. It limits his ability to sell his labor for the highest price that he can get, and it limits his access to the job market. It says, you can't get on that ladder. You remove the lower rungs, and so I can't climb up because of this arbitrary minimum wage. Because when you pass a minimum wage, you're not going to force an employer, right? If I'm an employer and there's a minimum wage of $10 an hour, and somebody comes to me and they can deliver $5 an hour worth of productivity, meaning if I hire that person, that will benefit me by $5 an hour. I'm not going to pay them $10 an hour because then I lose $5 an hour. The only way I'm going to hire somebody who's going to give me $5 an hour worth of productivity is if I can hire him for less than $5 an hour, so I can make a profit. So it's just like a floor. It's like if you cannot deliver enough productivity of whatever that minimum wage is, then you can't get a job. And so it's basically making it illegal for people to work. It is the stupidest law that anybody has ever conceived. It should be obliterated. I mean, there are some countries like Singapore.
So, okay, I just want to, because this really just gets to the heart of the issue and the heart of the minimum wage laws in general. This debate comes from, I mean, he brought up something that you learn in just a basic economics class, the idea of a price floor and that hurts the demand for labor. The problem with that is it does not take into account the elasticity for demand for labor. So that's very important. The elasticity, because if we're talking about labor, the demand is the employer, the supplier is the people providing labor, the workers. What elasticity is when like the price changes, like when the price being demanded for labor, when that changes, how willing are the people, in this case would be the employers, how willing are they to pay that additional price? If you have a very inelastic demand for labor, that means even if the price goes up, people will still pay. People will still pay employers. And that is how it works for labor, because employers need workers. They do. They can't run without workers. Like all these people, Jeff Bezos, he didn't need the workers or anything. Absolutely does. Employees need the workers. They are necessary. And so that is why in instances where you see the minimum wage raising to $15 an hour, you don't see this massive job loss because the elasticity for demand is very inelastic. Please, I mean, I've definitely look more into that term. It's something, it's an economics term, but it's a more complicated economics term. And people like Peter Schiff, they apparently just stopped after Economics 101 and they didn't go on to learn these more complicated issues because the demand for labor is inelastic. Thus, when you have something like a minimum wage, employers will still pay it because they need the people and their profit margins will allow it. That's the other thing. It takes into account that, people like Peter Schiff will talk about these businesses like they're on the verge of going out of business. And some are, certainly some are, but just if we look at the data, that is not at large, that is not the majority of businesses, the majority of, this includes small businesses, can pay a higher minimum wage, a living wage. And there is an argument to be made that you shouldn't have an employee if you can't pay them enough where they can survive if they're working full time. That should be how it goes.
Minimum wage, and the average income in Singapore is higher than it is here. Per capita, there's a lot more millionaires there. I mean, people have no problem. We didn't always have a minimum wage in the United States. I mean, this is a creation of government, and but the initial minimum wages, if you want to actually go to the origins of minimum wage in the United States.
So actually, he did bring up Singapore there, and I just want to use that as kind of like a catch-all for people use other states. I mean, Scandinavia gets brought up all the time because they don't have a minimum wage, and they will say, "Oh, see, look, these countries don't have minimum wages. Guess it's bad." And they just ignore everything else about that country. They just look at the fact that they don't have a minimum wage. But if you look at Scandinavia, Singapore, I mean, these people, they have high amounts of unionization. I mean, Singapore is a whole nother issue. It's a very small country. It has, with all the different trade that goes through there and everything. I mean, Singapore has some really, really interesting things. I mean, but they do have universal health care. They do have like mandatory saving. Like the government requires that you save money, like a certain amount. That Singapore absolutely has some things that Peter Schiff's libertarian ideology would not allow for, but he just cherry picks a little. Oh, they don't have a minimum wage, and like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if we wanted to implement all the policies in like Scandinavia, I would 100% take the trade off of, oh yeah, no minimum wage, because they have collective bargaining. And what collective bargaining is basically unions, and like tons of unions. I mean, if you're a worker in Scandinavia, you are almost 100% going to be a part of a union, and because of that, their minimum wage, quote unquote, is effectively like $19 an hour, because they have so much. Because when workers can bargain, like all together, they can bargain for better wages. And so it's one of those things where like, yes, they do not have a minimum wage, but you could put a minimum wage in Scandinavia and nothing would happen. Like nothing, because the minimum wage is already higher. You could put a living wage as the bare minimum wage and nothing would change. No one would lose their job, because the effective minimum wage is already higher than a living wage. And I think that's where I'm going to stop this. Peter Schiff, he goes on for about like 7 more minutes, but those are some of the main arguments. I really hope you guys found this like somewhat informational. This was kind of like not the most clean cut way of doing this, but I just wanted, someone laying out the libertarian side of these arguments and then to kind of refute them. Please let me know in the comments what you think. If you disagree, please comment down below. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.